Last season of Dragonflight Mythic Plus, Season 4 is going to be here just in a few weeks, so I thought this would be a perfect timing to like take a look at Season 3 and talk a little bit about how it was and like is there anything like that could have been better, or you know, has it just been absolutely perfect? So this review will be like mostly from a tank perspective. I have actually played all roles, like, you know, as you've seen on the channel, I played both a healer and also, you know, I play tank clearly because I'm maining tank, but I also been playing both melee and range DPS, but most of this review is going to be from the perspective of a tank, even though that I think most of my points are just kind of general things. But, you know, let's start off right away with the dungeon pool. So the dungeon pool in Season 3 is kind of interesting because besides of the mega dungeons, no other, like, you know, season has had this many of old dungeons brought back up into the dungeon pool. And when this was first announced, I was actually genuinely really surprised if we wouldn't be seeing just any of the Dragonflight dungeons. I honestly thought that you know, we would see in Season 3 here all the Dragonflight dungeons, and then Season 4, the next one, it's going to be this whole like old dungeons and like all these mixed in turns, but apparently they switched that around. So yeah, we ended up getting a season where besides 2 dungeons, everything else was just an oldie. And how did that work out? Well, honestly, I think it worked out pretty well. Blizzard has, you know, had some hit and misses with these old dungeons. Something like, you know, Shadow Moon Battleground from like Season 1 and Vortex Pinnacle has been like 2 dungeons that like pretty notorious for being kind of meh or just mid in general. Shadow Moon Battleground was like completely undertuned, and Vortex Pinnacle just kind of became like a really slog just to get through. And then, you know, a controversial opinion probably, but Temple of the Jade Serpent, which apparently a lot of people hate, I absolutely adore. I think it's a really, really great rework, and I think it really highlights when Blizzard are doing their reworks really, really well, where they just are not doing huge difference. They are kind of like, you know, they're switching things up, like, you know, switching up the first boss almost completely, right? But still keeping the essence of the old dungeon intact. So when I first saw the announcement of like the dungeon pool here, I was honestly really, really excited. As it's a lot of the dungeons that I have, like, I really, really love just from like leveling and just like from old experience, right? I was excited to see Thrones' Heights because I remember, you know, back in Cataclysm, I was kind of like mind blown by the whole like atmosphere and aesthetic of that dungeon. I loved also leveling in Val'sharah, so, you know, seeing Darkheart Thicket is also a dungeon that, you know, I was excited to see. And the same thing goes with, you know, Atal'Dazar, Waycrest Manor, and of course Everbloom, because Everbloom was actually the dungeon that I voted for back in Shadowlands, like before Season 4 of Shadowlands, when we had to vote for what Warlords of Draenor dungeon we wanted to see. I actually voted for Everbloom because I thought it would be really, really fun to see it, you know, in Mythic Plus with like how open it is and all that. So they actually had a really interesting dungeon pool setup here going forward into Season 3, but in all honesty, what actually ended up happening is that we actually ended up having a pool that has a lot of like good dungeons and not a very few bad dungeons. But then at the same time, we don't really have, at least from my own personal opinion, we don't really have a dungeon that just like stands out, that you can just kind of just play over and over and over again. Like a 10 out of 10, right? That we had in like some seasons. Like if you think of the last 2 seasons we had, last season we had Freehold, which is for a lot of people is honestly the best dungeon experience you can have in World of Warcraft. And in the first season, there's my personal favorite dungeon of all time, Halls of Valor. So you basically had these 2 dungeons that you could just like run through and just always, you know, like you'll never get like tired of them. And I didn't really get that vibe from any of these dungeons. There wasn't really anyone that just really stood out. I was like, oh, this is just an amazing dungeon. At the same time though, I also just want to point out that there actually wasn't any dungeon in the same time that I was really dreading, or I just really did not want to do at all. Like, for example, last season where we had Vortex Pinnacle. That was one of those dungeons that I just really dreaded. I absolutely hated playing it, and I just did not think it was fun or anything. I would really honestly want to dodge it. And again, as mentioned, we haven't really seen that in this dungeon pool, I don't think. That is not to say that there isn't dungeons that kind of is, you know, but yeah, let's actually go right into it then. I think it'd be fair to start with the Dawn of the Infinite because those are actually kind of the new dungeons, the new mega dungeons. We did actually experience them right before the season began because they came out in 10.1.5 was it, or was 0.7? Anyways, it was before season 3. We got it to experience them as a heroic version, and I love that. I absolutely love that. That mega dungeon just going as like the heroic mode or the hard mode or whatever you want to call it. That really just felt like a 5-man raid team the way you went into, and then with the whole new news about Mythic Plus changing and like going up to Mythic 10, that's the first time you will actually have I'm sorry, yeah, that's like the first time you have like affixes and like all that kind of stuff, all the new changes and stuff like that really made me not being a timer anymore. I thought is interesting because playing the Dawn of the Infinite hard mode really highlighted like how different that experience can be. How much enjoyable it is to actually go in and have the time to like soak in all the mechanics and all the bosses and just have a blast. In Mythic Plus though, honestly, Dawn of the Infinite was the dungeons that I dreaded the most in the beginning of the season. And I think a lot of that has to come with that they are kind of jarring, that they are so modern compared to all the other dungeons that are like 4 to 8 years old or something like that. So the mechanical complexity is definitely more intense in Dawn of the Infinite, and I think that was kind of what led to a more frustrating experience here in the beginning, a couple of weeks. Simply because like it took a long time for me and everyone else included to kind of figure out the dungeon and a lot of these, and I'm kind of just like putting these two together because I kind of do see them as like the same entity, right? Even though Rise is notoriously more harder than Fall is, I still kind of see them as the same vibe because they kind of have the same flow in them, in the sense that like it's very boss orientated. But I think a lot of the frustration basically comes down to it feels like a lot of the mechanics are based around positioning and placement of yourself and your character, which I always kind of is really frustrating because it's a situation where if people don't know it makes the fight so much harder, which increases the frustration, of playing the dungeons when you're playing in a setting where people are not really quite aware of like where to put themselves and place themselves. But as time has gone on and like also we've seized a few nerfs and stuff like that, and we will talk about like the balance and the difficulty of this season because I think that's like a huge effect of like how well it's been received and all that. But the more that we played with this dungeon, the more we learned it and stuff like that, I'm really starting to actually enjoying my time in them. I really am. Mega dungeon wise, I would honestly still rank it relatively low. And this is not like an aesthetic thing or anything, because like actually the hard mode version of this and playing in that kind of setting honestly made this one of the best experiences I've had in WoW. But from a Mythic Plus standpoint, I still think, and don't kill me for this, I think Kerrisan, in my own personal opinion, is the lowest on the rank list. And Tazavesh is the number one. So it's kind of like between Junkyard and the Mega Gnome Mega Dungeon. You know what I'm talking about from BFA. Dawn of the, I think it's just above that. So it's like on a second place of the Mega Dungeons. Aesthetically, it's absolutely stunning and amazing. The only really issue I have with it, besides having to learn the mechanics, is the RP, and I think everyone is gonna mention this as well as again. Like it's forever. And it's stupid when we are playing a mode that is timeable to have this kind of RP, and I kind of get the feeling the Blizzard wants immersive and stuff like that. But we are not playing Mythic Plus to immerse ourselves in the dungeons, right? We are not. If you want to do that, and the people who want to do that, they are experiencing that immersion in other situations where the RP has room and place to be, right? Because there is no timer on it. In Mythic Plus, it just doesn't belong. Darkheart Thicket is probably the worst dungeon in this dungeon pool. At least for me, right? It's honestly dreadfully boring. And this is what I was trying to mention before, with me being like, oh, I'm doing this from a tank perspective, because Darkheart Thicket is very much, it's dreadfully boring from a tank perspective. So what makes this, and it's not just boring, it is also really frustrating. So what makes this frustrating is the beginning of the dungeon is very heavy on like the amount of mobs and packs that you can body pull. And you better believe that it's getting body pulled. And this is not throwing shame at anyone else, like, because people body pull, it's kind of whatever. But it does lead to a frustrating point. And this is more from a, like, the dungeon map design, or like, the actual, like, the packs and where they are gathered up, and like how to, like, it's too cramped. It's always a little bit eerie. Or you go like, it just always lead to kind of like a negative experience. At worst. At best, yeah, you just skip the packs and you're fine, but it kind of feels like a 50-50 at this point. And that's like the kind of the thing, because like the dungeon that just really is asking you to skip a lot, because you are overcapping on percentage really fast if you're just pressing W and going the way. And it's weird because you actually have plenty of time, because a lot of the packs that are in the way, or like just if you press W, are actually not really, you have the bears that are like mini bosses, but everything else is just regular mobs, meaning that you are not actually losing that much time if you're just pressing W and you're not skipping anything. Which kind of leads to this mismatch, at least in my head, where I'm like, I need to be efficient, but because like the game is literally telling me, wow, you are like 120%, right? Like you need to be more efficient, but at the same time, I'm getting kind of the same results, honestly. So it kind of just creates this, like, as I mentioned, like this mismatch of like, I need to be more efficient, but also in practice, I don't really need to be. From a time perspective, you do actually have the two bosses in the beginning that are sort of interesting. The second boss is at least like interesting, right? Because that boss hits hard, and it really requires you to be efficient with your cooldown rotation and just your defensive values and capabilities, right? You really need to make sure that you hit your defensive on all of the different tank busters, because there are honestly multiple in here. And you need to be aware of like not getting rooted, and also making sure to pick up all the ads. There's a lot going on, and I honestly kind of like it. But and also the first boss is also kind of like interesting, because he has that whole like knocking you back, and then you have to like, he's charging you, but you can't, like, you have to wait to move, and like there's like some rhythm to it. Honestly, I like the two bosses. But can you honestly, can you explain to me why there are, like, why 2 out of the 4 bosses just doesn't have any mechanics for the tank? And I mean, okay, yeah, the dragon boss, it kind of do, you have to move out of the sight when he does the breath, and you have to move the boss when, if a puddle is spawned like badly or whatever. Which, you know what? I'm not gonna count that as a tank mechanic. It's stepping a little bit to the left. That's all. Like, to dodge the breath. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And then you have the last boss, which is just an absolute snooze fest from a tank perspective. It's a difficult fight from, like, it has a hard like healing check, and also like, for DPSs I have to make sure that they are standing in. But as a tank, there's literally nothing. Like, there is nothing there. You're not getting hit by like anything that's ever gonna put you in any danger whatsoever. All you need to do is just dodge swirlies and make sure that you are standing near or like available if someone like needs to get like not cleared, but like not getting feared, if you know what I mean. Like, stand in the circle. So you just have like 2 bosses just doesn't do anything for you, and everything in like the packs in between that are just also kind of annoying, right? So if you move past the first like the first boss, right? So before that, you have all these packs that can easily be body pulled. Now you clear the first boss, you move into the next like area of the dungeon, and now you have like these dryads, I think they're called, the lady deers, women with their spears, which are just, they are so annoying. So yeah, it's like they are forcing you to like, because you could basically just pull the entire room there from like from the first boss almost all the way down to the silence mobs. But the thing that's like stopping you from doing that is just the dryads, because they are just gonna keep like annihilating your team. And since they're ranged, you know, and also they jump around, having multiple in them, meaning that you're just always gonna have one try just completely hamming and away, right? Which is just no bueno if you're playing like higher keys, meaning that, and this is like one of the things again from the tank perspective, it feels just awful when you know you can honestly survive pulling more, but there are these like small annoyances or like small issues that just does the, like it wouldn't be wise to do it. And yeah, I get it. It's a mechanic, like, of course, the range, like, you know, person is gonna, like, jump away or trying to get away from you because, like, that's their weakness, being standing melee, but oh my god, it's so annoying. It's so annoying. I honestly don't mind much of the other packs in this dungeon. Even the silence mobs there, which is basically just a CC check. But I do actually think it feels good when it's like working out and you're actually like hitting off the CC. And if you pull them like just them alone, some fears going off is honestly not going to wipe you most likely. So it's not like a do or die. It's just more of like a nuance, annoyance and like a time save if you can just like CC them and just like kill them all in one, right? And then, you know, the packs between the dragon boss and the last boss it's also perfectly fine. It's just I played, you know, because I'm main Vengeance Demon Hunter, and then going on to other tanks such as like the Warrior, the Brewmaster, or whatever. It just feels really because everything is a caster and I'm like used to being like able to silence it. So that's not really a dungeon flow, I guess. It's just more of like oh man, I wish I was playing more Vengeance Demon Hunter, or I just wish that multiple classes had their CCs, I guess. Now, funny enough, Atal'Dazar and Everbloom are the dungeons I look the most forward to. I actually didn't play Mythic Plus in BFA because I honestly quit. I took a long break doing basically all of BFA. So I actually never really got to experience it really in Mythic Plus or in a season. So this was actually my first time, and I was actually really looking forward to it because I think that dungeon is so beautiful. And yeah, I can say that I had a really good time. I love dungeons that are open in the sense of like you can choose multiple packs of like, you know, what you want to do and what you like, where you want to pull up an extra percentage or like what you want to. And there's actually a lot of like strategy in Atal'Dazar you can do. At the end of this season here, everything kind of gets put in stone, or like you just kind of like gets really like fit and fixed. But coming up with the strategies for Atal'Dazar has been really fun. It's also the only dungeon, I think, in WoW's history, at least in Mythic Plus, that has actually been buffed. and that was like really great, honestly. I really think the Blizzard should be more open to buffing more things, because, you know, yeah, running, like smashing through a dungeon it can be fun, but like I also want a little bit of challenge. And just being able to steamroll an entire dungeon, or just, I think people were doing like insane amount of like keys higher than their average in Atal'Dazar because it was so much easier. So it being buffed up perfectly makes sense. A huge thumbs up from here. But yeah, talking about like, you know, strategize and stuff like that, I love the fact that you have to, I don't know if you have to, but at least I did. Like the where you BL in the beginning, it kind of depends on like if it's tyrannical or if it's fortified, right? You go up in the left if it's fortified, and go up and do the double pack and bloodlust there, or if it's the tyrannical, you can go straight down to the Rexar, I think he's called, right? The T-Rex boss, right? And bloodlust there, and I love those like, you know, choices that you have to actively make. I was worried about the totem boss, if I have to be honest. In parking experience, I thought that was going to be a nightmare. Honestly, it wasn't, because the boss doesn't just one-shot you. You can actually survive multiple mistakes. Again, something we'll talk a little bit more with, like difficulty-wise. But yeah, no, it's been really great. The only thing that's negative about the Atal'Dazar was actually puts it down a little bit, and honestly, it puts it a lot down. It's the fact that the last boss is so difficult. So Blizzard decided to make the change that her cast, the one that like the dot that really hurts people, that she throws up on like, you know, random targets, that can't be interrupted anymore, which she could in the beginning, the first week or weeks of the season. which I'm not really sure that was the way to go, because it just kind of just makes it like extremely hard just to like that extra damage that you're getting out that you can't really do anything more about, because already before it was kind of like a hard healing check, but now it's really difficult. And again, it's not that I mind difficult bosses, but there's also something about like flow and the placement of these hard bosses, because Blizzard are not like, it's not new for them to put in a boss that has like a hard healing check or just a DPS check or just, you know, a check to make sure that you guys are good enough and you have like good enough gear and all that to get through. But what sucks is when they put that boss at the very end, because you can steamroll Atal'Dazar, right? Like maybe do a little few mistakes in case you don't not gonna time it or anything. But like if you do like a few mistakes, you can get to the last boss with like plenty of time left, and then everything can just fall apart right there. And it just sucks, because I would much rather just know from the get-go, from like the first boss, if like I can do this dungeon or not. It feels so bad that you just basically wasted 20 minutes because you went through the whole dungeon and then you get to the last boss and that's where everything just falls apart. So I think Atal'Dazar is a really fun dungeon. I had a lot of fun with it. But that last boss and that last like boss fight right there, that honestly takes it down. And it's not that I don't like the boss fight, because I actually really think it's really fun. The whole like having to kite properly, having to analyze where your team is going, where like, you know, they are stacking, and like where the souls are coming from and all that kind of stuff. Making sure that people like have not enough room for the spiders. I honestly like the fight a lot, but it just gives a bad gameplay experience, at least in my opinion, that it's so difficult. It's the fact that it's like such a notoriously notch up from like the other bosses, especially if you're going from the I was about to call it the priest boss, right? Because that's like one of the more easier fights in this season, might be the easiest even. So going from her to the last boss, that is such like a step up that just comes kind of just like, it feels like out of nowhere. Waycrest Manor was the other BFA dungeon, and I was looking really forward to this dungeon, but I was also really nervous. And I was nervous because I am a Cream Rail Depot veteran. I have been in those small hallways, and I've been in them with Storming and Sanguine, and that is not a fun combo. And I was really like I was looking forward to it because I really like Waycrest Manor from like the aesthetic. I think it's one of the most aesthetically pleasing. I don't know if that's like the right context to use that, but like it's one of the coolest dungeons that we have in the game, right? It's a haunted villa or like a mansion. And you just get that vibe and the atmosphere right away as soon as you step in. It's atmospheric and like aesthetically, it's like a 10 out of 10, right? But the other thing that also made me kind of dread it is the fact that in BFA, the doors, like where you can start off and where like direction you had to run off, that was actually randomized and you didn't actually have a choice in the matter, which is a huge difference from what we have now, where like every single door is open and you can just go where you want to go. And even though everyone ended up going the exact same route 100% of the time, and I'm even gonna be like 9 out of 10, no, 100% of the time everyone goes left, it's still the choice that you have is really, really important. I think that like this dungeon would have absolutely blown if it has just been like stayed the same as BFA and just like had random doors. I think with Waycrest Manor, the first half is really like banger. I think it's intense because you have a lot of packs that can really overwhelm you very quickly. But if you are a little bit smart of like how you're pulling, but also being a little bit aggressive here, you will get like a lot of like saved time on your end. Also the bosses, I really enjoy here in the beginning. I like the witches. It's not really much is going on from a tank perspective, but now that I have played a little bit of healer and actually seen it, a lot is going on here. And honestly, it's a lot of fun because it's a lot of different, I'm about to say like it's mechanics, but a lot of like different things you have to interact with and like, you know, react to, right? So from a healer perspective, it's the whole like, okay, so now you need to like pump a lot of healing because they had this needle on them that like is the debuff that makes it so they're just gonna keep taking damage unless they reach this life HP threshold, right? At the same time, the next like witch, she puts a 50% healing reduction on everyone, meaning that you can't really pump away, so you need to like be smart or like have something else prepared for that, right? Or make sure that everyone is healed up. What I wanted to say though is also that the difference between Criminal Depot and then Waycrest Manor with the whole like small hallways, you actually have a choice to pull everything out to the courtyard, which makes a world of a difference when you are like tanking or just, when you're just playing dungeon, right? Pulling everything out has been an extremely, I think it's really, really fun and also, again, intense. Like, when you have to, like, stand in the doorway and run in and pick up everything, you really have to, like, react fast because you are, like, I was about to say timed, but, like, things are hitting and you can't just waste all your defensive abilities picking things up because then you have nothing when you actually are fighting the mobs. But it's fun that the option is there because that actually just makes you feel like that you're really like playing the dungeon, right? You're like flipping it around and like playing it not a way that's maybe not intended, but like you're making it your own, which I always it's one of the things that makes me love tanking in World of Warcraft and just playing Mythic Plus. So yeah, like having that courtyard is a huge plus. And then I just want to say, like, I really enjoyed the free boss. I'm sorry, the tree boss, the second guy. Again, it's like the mechanics are kind of like in the player's hand in the way that like you are the one who has to decide if you want to remove your stacks or if you actually just want to eat them all up. You also need to make sure that your healer is ready for the stacks and stuff like that. There's a lot of consideration, but again, all the control and the power is in the player's hand, which I just think is a huge plus. Now, I honestly don't really have anything really negative to say about the rest of the dungeon, but I honestly just don't really have anything positive to say either. It's really just okay, right? Like, there's not really any points that are shining or standing out for me. At the end, I like the pull right before the last boss, just because you have this like small mobs, but like a lot of them, and it's a big pull, right? Who doesn't like a big pull? But yeah, it's not that it doesn't. I just want to point out here. I honestly think it's really like finely tuned and everything the bosses, but there is just not really much to write home about. It's quite simple. As soon as you have like, it feels like also with Waycrest Manor, as soon as you're done with the courtyard, you're basically home safe, right? I was very much looking forward to see what they were doing with the rework of Throne to Tides. And honestly, I think would be fair to say that this is probably one of the best reworks they have done. Especially if you compare it to something like Vortex of Vanicle from last season, right? The tuning here really feels spot on, in my opinion. It's one of those dungeons where there isn't actually a lot of unavoidable damage, outside of boss fights and all that kind of stuff. And you also have like some avoidable damage, of course, but like it really feels like if you have a key understanding of like what mobs you need to kick and like have a control over that, it really feels like you can go through this pretty safe. At the same time, like Throne of Time is also a dungeon that can like really overwhelm you really, really fast if you overpull something. The dungeon is extremely linear, and that's nothing to do with the rework, right? It's always been extremely linear. And from a tank perspective, that's kind of like putting it down just a little bit because, I want to make choices. But playing it as a DPS, though, has been surprisingly fun because the great thing about linear dungeons is they are linear. So as a DPS, when you really just want to plan ahead of like using your cooldowns, you kind of want like the same run almost every single time. And when the dungeon is so linear as Throne of Tides are, it's kind of really difficult to not have the exact same cooldown usage that you always have. Meaning that it's a really good dungeon to like practice your DPS rotation. I don't really enjoy the first boss. I don't really think anyone does. It kind of feels like a filler boss, and honestly, it could have been cut. Just to be like harsh or cruel, I don't know. Like, I guess that it opens the whole open doors box of like if they go into these reworks with cut content. But honestly, if this dungeon was shorter, I think it would be greater. It was just a free boss run, and you could just go in, zoom in, go out, and go in. Like, yeah, I think it honestly could have been better with just the second boss being the first boss. I really enjoyed the totem boss. I really enjoyed it. It's always fun to be tested on your survivability as a tank, because like that's kind of what you're, playing a tank for, right? Like, you want to be the big beefy guy who just can take so many punches. This is the boss for you. It can be extremely stressful, but it's always so rewarding on like when you're done with it and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I cleared it, right? Because it's almost like at least when you're like pushing like higher keys and stuff like that, all of them are like all that. Every time you do that fight, it's always gonna like push you right to the edge of like, okay, it dies as soon as you don't have anything left. I think the replacement of the last boss is a fitting boss to have. It kind of fits the aesthetic and the atmosphere there, but it's not really a boss I'm gonna write like home about or like will remember too much. Again, it's not really that much of a hassle as long as you're like playing it correctly. You're stacking the pools and you're clearing them and all that kind of stuff. You have the ads to be aware about, but yeah, no, it's one of those again where it's kind of just. It's not bad and it's not really good either. It's there, it's doable, and it's fine. And then we have Everbloom. The Everbloom was, the dungeon I was looking the most forward to. I remember it from Worlds of Draenor. I remember playing it back then. And I remember I was completely stunned by it because I thought it was one of the most beautiful areas and dungeons I've ever been in. Also, I think the whole concept of like the plants are taking over and you can see like these Draenor orcs being completely like intertwined with the plants and stuff like was like nightmare fuel. So having this place that's like absolutely terrifying but being so lush and bright and colorful was one of the most like beautiful dungeons ever made. And the thing I love about this dungeon, besides its aesthetic, is the fact it's the choice, right? So you basically have like what I will label as like the three areas. You have the area from like from the beginning, from the entrance to first boss, where you have like all these flowers and casters and the wasps or whatever they are, stingers. Then you have from the second boss, from the first boss to the second boss, we have like this berserker area, and then the last area is like the mages. And what it basically just boils down to is the fact that you have a choice of like, if you just press W and just go through all the back, you will overpull like percentage wise. So you kind of have a choice of like where you want to skip, like what area do you want to hang out the least amount in. And I, made it clear before in like earlier videos and stuff like that I always like enjoyed skipping the mages, because the mages kind of always seems like it just goes bad or can go bad really fast in PoCs. But I could also skip the middle area and then just do all the mages, or I could like probably just skip the first area if I could probably just like go straight to boss. But Everbloom has an issue that a lot of dungeons honestly has, is the fact that I'm not really sure Blizzard knows how to balance mini-bosses when it comes to Mythic Plus. Now, I'm a sucker for a mini-boss, and mini-bosses by that I basically just mean it's like mobs that are clearly like outlined different from all the other mobs. They have like different mechanics, they have more health, and they are typically more dangerous. In Everbloom, going to the first boss, you have this roaming huge like tree. I think if you want to be lore accurate, I think they call ancients. But yeah, no, you have that guy like walking and patrolling from the first boss up to basically the entrance. And it kind of just highlights the issue I have with mini bosses in this game, at least when they're done kind of not good. Basically, in my opinion, what the mini-bosses should like boil down to is basically it's a question of risk and reward, right? If you chooses to engage with a mini-boss, what you should get out of it is like a lot of percentage and basically like you should get a lot of percentage that you can hopefully skip other packs and like skip time through that, right? What you're risking is that the mini-boss is going to be like highly dangerous, right? And this tree boss, like what he does is that he like roots you, and then he, after a few seconds, by the way, you need to like get out of the roots. You can kill the roots and to get out of them, but if you don't, he's gonna like force spawn like a wind or like tornado thing on you that's gonna damage you and silence you. And it's not a lot of damage, and people can help you out with your roots. Meaning that there isn't actually, it's annoying, don't get me wrong, it's annoying to be silent and having to rely on this, but it's not necessarily gonna kill you that often, except if you're pushing like really high keys. But it just takes forever, because he has so much health, and that has typically been a thing about the mini bosses, where like, oh, it's a mini boss, he has like special mechanics, but let's just give him like millions of health. And what sucks about this is that, okay, so this is probably a bad mini boss exam, because I don't really like this mechanic. Again, as I mentioned before, I just think it's more annoying than anything. But, when a mini boss has this much health, which just takes this long to kill, it will never be chosen over just killing a pack, because it's a huge time loss, right? And that just sucks, because some of these mini bosses could have amazing mechanics, really fun to play with, and I want to engage it, and like making the choice of like, I want to engage it, right? Like I have a good crew, I know I can do this, like let me just like go this route. But instead we are ending up with basically what feels like a minefield. Is this like stay clear of this area, because if you accidentally pull, it's just gonna take forever and just suck. I mean, but else, Everbloom is a fun dungeon. It's not as fun as I thought it actually would be. I guess it's just not really mechanically that interesting, a lot of these situations. I do like some of the bosses. I do like the mage boss, honestly. That has actually become a really favorite of mine. And it's a boss that I really struggled on in the first couple of weeks, and I think a lot of people did. But yeah, no, it actually turned out to be a really fun dungeon. I did have an issue with the last boss. But then I tried that boss on a healer, and also just as a DPS, just basically anything other than a tank, and no, it shines more there. So I don't really I mean, it would be more interesting to get more interesting tank mechanics, but what can you do, right? I think everything else is honestly also fine, just because like you have a briefer, and I mean it becomes like a briefer. Because you have the second boss, which can be kind of intense as a tank, especially when you're pushing higher keys. That like charge the melee boss does, it can hit like you really hard. The first boss is also made no sense when I first started playing it. I just did not understand what the mechanic was. But now that it's basically just a DPS burn mechanic. Yeah, it's simple, but honestly, it's kind of fun just to let it rip. Now, there's one dungeon I haven't mentioned yet, and that's Black Rook Hold. That's because it's honestly the biggest surprise of mine. I remember back in Legion. I mean, I played it. I thought it was. I mean, all the Legion dungeons are like really good. So even if like a Legion dungeon is mid, it's still like overall pretty good. But yeah, no, I definitely thought that Black Rook Hold was like one of the weaker dungeons in Legion. And yet, so when you heard that this one was coming, I was like, oh, okay, well, okay, whatever, sure. But actually, it turns out to be probably my favorite dungeon, this dungeon pool. And it's simply just because there's honestly, it's a really good flow in the dungeon. So you start off with like a huge bloodlust and like a big pool, right? That's fun. Then you get a little bit of briefer with the first boss, which is kind of like simple and easy. And yeah, as I mentioned before, like it just gives you a little bit of briefer, a little bit like get your composure back up and stuff like that after the first pull. Now, and then you do actually have a 30-second RP, which for some reason, no one is mentioning that at all. Everyone is talking about the RP is bad in Dawn of the Infinite. What the hell is up with 30 seconds RP after the door? Why is that a thing? 30 seconds! 30 seconds, that's such a long time in Mythic Plus. But, after the first thing RP, you are basically just going from like big pull to big pull to big pull to big pull, like all the way through, right? I also like the second boss. I actually don't really know why I like it so much, but it's kind of just fun to get like, smashed in the head with the tank buster. It's physical damage, so a lot of tanks have something interesting to like mitigate it with. I've been playing Warrior a lot recently, and they can just completely like block it, which is a lot of fun. It feels really rewarding when the boss is just like, it's supposed to do a lot of damage on you, but they just not. Going into the next area after the second boss, again, huge pulls. yeah, I don't really know if I'm a huge fan of the rocks going down the stairs. I mean, it's kind of whatever, right? It's kind of sure, okay. Like all the bosses, like all the as I mentioned before, like huge pulls, good flow in the dungeon. Yeah, just overall, I'm really surprised by Blackrock Hold. So yeah, that was like my opinion on the dungeons, and just to like sum it up, or as I mentioned before, basically this season has been really great. But with the dungeons, like it's again, like there's nothing like. It's really difficult to pick out a dungeon and be like, this is terrible, because there isn't really a terrible dungeon. The same way that, you know, I think Blackrock Hold is the best. I still think it's a little bit too long sometimes, and I don't really like the aesthetic too much. I think it can be a little bit boring just to look at the whole purple, bluish color scheme the whole way through. So there's not really that 10 out of 10 dungeon. But again, yeah, I think it, like overall it's difficult to point fingers at this season and going to be like, oh, it's bad because of the dungeons, because it's definitely not. I think the dungeons are overall, and I think a lot of you people would also just think they are overall bangers. I just think that, you know, there are better dungeons, but there are definitely also a lot of worse dungeons that they could have picked. The last thing here I want to touch on with this season, I think it's actually really important, is talking about difficulty. I mentioned it like almost every single video, but yeah, this season is a lot easier than it previous has ever been. Right, people were doing 20s in the first week, which they don't typically do. I know people are like pushing really crazy, and they definitely get into 20s in the first couple of weeks, but the first week or first couple of days is honestly crazy. You know, there are a lot of different reasons why the balancing is like this. It's not just because it's undertuned or like whatever. That's definitely a huge factor of it. Like, you know, tuning is Blizzard who's like specifically doing that, right? They're putting in the numbers. But there's also just the fact that like all these engines are older. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, the mechanical complexity is a lot bigger in Dawn of the Infinite than it is in the other dungeons. So you will just end up with having a lot of mechanics that are basically just make sure you kick it or else you die. And as soon as you get that under control, then, you know, there is not really that much ongoing damage in these dungeons. And talking about tuning, this is a huge conspiracy theory, by the way. I don't have any proof for this. This is just a gut feeling or something I have told myself might be right. But last season, Blizzard ran into a huge problem with the Augmentation Invoker and balancing, which we probably all know. We probably don't have to talk about that. I'm sure Blizzard wouldn't mind if we skipped over that pretty fast. But no, yeah, augmentation completely terrorized the game, like from a balance standpoint, because you needed them, right? And augmentation is still really crazy good. You might be surprised when you're saying that, because like, no, it's not. Yeah, that's true. It's DPS wise, it's honestly a loss to pick on Augmentation Invoker, which I think is a huge, you know, reason for why you don't see them. But the defensive value that augmentation gives has been nerfed, but it's still insane. The amount of like defensive capability it just gives you entire party. And one thing about like last season is that it was actually quite difficult. We had a lot of dungeons that just had a lot of like ongoing, that had a lot of healer checks and just a lot of damage outgoing, right? And so honestly, undertuning the dungeons, I think, again, conspiracy here, I think it's partially done because they don't really know how to balance Augmentation Invoker. So yeah, they can nerf their damage, but they're still gonna bring out like so much defensive that they kind of just have to make the dungeons and the whole season so much easier that it's not really that needed anymore. And I gotta be honest, I was a little bit disappointed by this difficulty, which is funny because it's honestly what I was disappointed by is that I really love to push. And I really love to push in the area where it just doesn't just become straight up one shots, because I think that's kind of where Mythic Plus can get kind of tedious a little bit. And it kind of felt like that area was very quickly removed. It really felt like you're just pushing up a little bit too fast, which is, it feels stupid to say, but that's honestly my opinion. I was a little bit surprised about like how fast it actually just went by, and like, you know, how fast you just up in the 20s and doing 20s. But with that said, I think this season has been the most welcoming and the easiest season to get into. And I think overall, because you can just see on on all the statistics and stuff like that, this is the most played season probably like ever. And I think honestly, this difficulty is extremely, extremely healthy for the game. And I would much rather have this healthy and good player base rather than just having a little bit more difficult seasons, even though I do actually enjoy the difficulty and I do actually enjoy some of the dungeons fighting back a little bit. And it's funny because while I have wished for a slower grind on my main, the difficulty and the accessibility of this season has just also made it this probably the best season to play alts in. I've had such a blast just playing all of my different characters and classes and just trying out a lot of different things because, again, it's so easy just to get into Mythic Plus. You don't really need to overgear or need a lot of gear because, as I mentioned before, it's not really that much damage. So, yeah, so even if I might personally have wanted the season to be just a little bit more harder or just the dungeons to kick back just a little bit more, I can't deny that I think this is overall really, really healthy for the game, and I think a lot of people think that Season 3 might have been the best season, and I think that's completely valid. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and listening along, and you know what, also comment down below what you think. I can't wait to hear your opinion about this season. And yeah, so take care everyone.